Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Discussions of Darkness. This week I wanted to return to my old faithful stomping ground of Changeling the Lost, and I wanted to talk about something that is commonly used as an aspect of world building, specifically for the Winter Court, and I wanted to expand on it as to how it could affect the rest of the game and how this is a great template to be used in other places and other, spheres to really enhance the way the game feels and the way it sounds, particularly to your players. But for folks who aren't sure what I'm talking about, and maybe the title wasn't illustrative enough for you, we're talking about Mourning Cant. For folks who are not Changeling the Lost players, I'm going to back up a little bit to explain exactly what it is I'm talking about here, especially if you didn't check out our video essay from Mr. Nowhere. But in Changeling the Lost, individuals are stolen from the real world by beings of godlike power called the True Fae. The True Fae then change you, tearing out part of your soul on the thorns of the hedge, that place between our world and their world of Arcadia, and into it they pour fairy magic. This changes you into something else. You are some variety of servant, some variety of pet. When you come back to the real world, there are still aspects of the thing that you were made into that are now just part of who you are. Changelings are paranoid. They tend to constantly be looking over their shoulder for their old keepers, and, this sort of defines their relationship to one another and to their own emotions in a lot of ways. In order to protect themselves, changelings form into courts. Courts are ideas that they swear fealty to, and those ideas tend to be tied to a specific emotion, and that specific emotion usually informs the kinds of tasks and jobs that these changelings take part in. The one we're focusing on, as I mentioned, is the Winter Court, the Court of Sorrow. Winter is very secretive. Winter tends to be the spy masters, the information collectors, and the assassins of the changeling world. While those are all stereotypes, those are also very much the role that they tend to fulfill. And as part of that role, they have something called Mourning Cant. And the idea of Mourning Cant is fairly simple in theory, but in practice it can be difficult to bring across. In short, Mourning Cant is the idea of thieves' lingo, spy jargon. It is a way for Winter Courtiers to communicate with one another out in the open, with no one nearby being able to understand what it is that they're saying. And this is not a new idea. This is something that has been part of intelligence operations as long as such things have existed. And generally speaking, you would have people using a particular language that was not well spoken in an area. You would have people sending coded messages, anything that you would see, particularly during the high stakes of times like World War II, where there were constant codes and code breakers fighting to see who would maintain superiority. Mourning Cant is a natural and somewhat magical extension of that. While the language itself is not woven through with magic, the way that it functions is it's basically just taglines, keywords, and English-sounding phrases that really mean something else. And this allows Winter Courtiers to communicate with one another in front of mortals without those mortals understanding what they're talking about. But it could even allow them to communicate in front of their own motley, their own friends, their people from other courts, and they will have no idea what it is the Winter Courtiers are talking about. To someone idly standing by, it might sound like they're planning a party or they're shopping for a gift for a significant other, when in reality the conversation was about how to dispose of certain bodies, or setting up an arms deal, or getting the lowdown on what happen to be the biggest dangers in the city right now of someone from outside the city talking to someone who's a local representative. And I've made this comparison before in other videos, but it is something that I feel really works as a comparison for folks who are more in the mainstream or folks who might be newer to the world of Chronicles of Darkness, and they just don't really have a solid reference for what this is referencing. A little redundant, but that's the nature of language, as we're talking about today. But what I would look at for this is the John Wick series of films. They have a very similar vibe to the World of Darkness, in that we have characters who exist as part of a hidden society that exists in plain sight, and they have their own ways of doing things, their own inbuilt mythology, and their own verisimilitude for how things function in that world and, under the table as it is. And because of the popularity of these films, because of how widespread knowledge of the codes, key phrases, catchwords are, it makes a very quick one-to-one comparison, because what is the phone call that John has after his house is raided, where he's making a dinner reservation and then Charlie and his boys show up to take care of all these unwanted bodies? That is a perfect explanation of what Mourning Cant would sound like. And we see it in various other places. The euphemism of the armorer as a sommelier is another great just example of taking a word that means one thing, using it to mean something else. And anyone who is nearby listening will have no idea. But when you look at the association, it's really interesting to see how that language came to be. And that is the kind of thing that really helps bring Mourning Cant home. Because while it first appeared in the original Changeling the Lost back in the first edition of the game, we're currently in second edition, and in keeping with Winter's way of being squirrely, it's difficult to find all the references scattered throughout the books that have been released. However, it was originally found in Lords of Summer on page 91. And in that description, which may have changed slightly, do not take me at my word on this, but in the original description, it was essentially Mourning Cant was treated as its own unique language, and you could more or less use it anywhere there was a Winter Court stronghold. The exact dialect might change, the phrases might be different, there might be, much the same way you would find different dialects of any language. But you could make yourself understood, and you could understand what it was your counterpart was telling you. And that's the important part of it is a form of secret communication. However, this isn't just making a whole video about something that you could have your Winter Court players in a very specific Changeling game take as a merit. This is more a discussion of language and the way we use it to world build in the World and Chronicles of Darkness. Because while Mourning Cant is a very game-specific and very niche-specific idea, there should be some version of it across all the spheres, not in the sense that everyone should have their own specific language and everyone should have their own merit for it, but more to the point that all of these monsters, all of these creatures, and even the humans that hunt them, if you're playing a hunter game, they all have to exist in the same world. They have to avoid the attention of mortal authorities. They have to deal with the fact that there is mass surveillance everywhere, and that loose lips sink ships, and one wrong word said at the wrong place at the wrong time could be a serious problem. More importantly, you can't talk about supernatural matters in front of mortals. That is a big no-no in every game, because as I mentioned in an earlier video, if you get the torches and pitchforks, mortals can be really dangerous en masse, and that's without even getting things like massive militaries involved in hunting down the various supernatural communities, because 1v1 they will always come out ahead. 1v all, the supernatural community always loses, and that is why they try very hard to maintain that masquerade, that veil between themselves and the rest of the world. So as a storyteller, and as a player, if this is a thing that you know is going to be more your concern than your storytellers because of the game that you're in, ask what phrases, what language your community uses to talk about these things. Whether you're playing a mage game, a vampire game, even a Promethean game, because Promethean has all of their hobo sigils for marking territory and spreading words through graffiti, ask how it is you maintain operational security. How do you make sure the person you're talking to is the one who's getting your message, but not anyone else around you? Because those questions can lead to a lot of really interesting answers, and they can really affect your role-playing, they can affect the way you tell stories, they can affect all sorts of different parts of the game in a way that is really memorable. And for folks who are looking for a little inspiration, whether it's for Changeling or for another game, I would recommend picking up my supplement. It was the first one that I wrote for Changeling, actually, of 100 Mourning Cant dialects, phrases, and meanings. Because, as mentioned, it's more or less a single language, but languages are complicated. And so I wrote this supplement as a way to sort of get people interested in the idea and get all of our brains turning as to what Mourning Cant might sound like when you go to different cities, different towns, different cultures and subcultures. There's all sorts of different twists and turns it could take, and I think it's worth providing a resource to help people really bring out that creative aspect and to really make that part of the game memorable and unique. But that is all for this week. It's a relatively straightforward topic. It's just something that I think is worth thinking about. And if you haven't gone through it, if you haven't really, put some mental calories into the exercise, I would recommend giving it a try because if nothing else, it's fun to think about and you might create your own lexicon for your table. As always, if there's a topic I have not covered or something you would like to hear me talk about or discuss for a future episode of the show, leave it down in the comments below. And until next time, happy gaming, everyone. Thank you for staying to the end of this episode of Discussions of Darkness. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and sharing it on your own social media to help boost the signal. And if you'd like to help us keep the show and channel going, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well. If you have any questions about the topic I covered today, or if you have something you'd like to see covered in a future episode, make sure to leave it in the comments below. Lastly, please check out the link in the video description to browse all of my World and Chronicles of Darkness supplements from Ezekiel Games. So far, we've covered Changeling the Lost, Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Awakening, and Geist the Sin Eaters, in addition to a handful of general supplements that will be useful for any game set in the World or Chronicles of Darkness settings. Thank you in advance for your support. You're the ones who help us keep the lights on, so we don't fade into the shadows.